Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this third session of the UNICC webinar series focused on several IT-related topics. Today, we are pleased to restart this series after the summer break with a session focused on AI governance and security, describing the UNICC approaches on these. Today's speakers will be Eric Antezana, a Senior Data Governance and Strategy Officer, and Tom Buellens, an Information Security Specialist, both working for the United Nations International Computing Center. I just would like to remind you that if you have any questions, you may use the chat. And at the end of the presentation, both speakers will be more than happy to answer your questions. In case we don't have enough time to answer all of them, we will anyway collect the questions and share afterwards via email with all attendees, along with the link to this to the registration of this session. So now I'm pleased to give the floor to Eric. Eric, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ilaria. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. I'm going to start sharing my screen so that we could start the session. There it goes. Okay, I trust you can see my screen, and thank you, Ilaria, for the introduction. As Ilaria mentioned, today we are going to be covering two topics. I will start with the first part, which is related to AI governance, and then my colleague Tom Buellens will take it over afterwards, talking about more about security and our approaches, let's say, that we've been following within our organization. So very quickly, this is the agenda that we are going to see. As I mentioned, just the first part I will be covering, then my colleague, and at the end there will be an opportunity for questions, of course, after we have reviewed a few key takeaways from both presentations, basically. I will start then with the first part, which is AI governance, and I would like to actually start with the motivation behind, let's say, this kind of topic. And in this slide, as you can see, there are a few questions that are typically let's say, taken as a motivation to see or evaluate our organizations, our different institutions, and to measure to what extent, let's say, we require or we need to embark basically on this relatively new topic of AI governance. The first one is about the accountability and responsibility for each one of the AI assets. An AI asset, as you can see it at the bottom of the screen, is basically any resource, data tool, model, algorithm, or infrastructure that contributes to the development, deployment, and management of AI systems. So basically, anything that is related to AI systems, basically. So in this first topic, the important or the key aspect is to see whether we have identified accountable and responsible people for those entities or for those resources. The next one is about the policies and guidelines, the next question. And this is actually to see whether those AI assets are compliant to those regulations, either internal regulations or external regulations, to see whether we are really following the rules, whether we are standardizing as let's say, it has been asked by other entities or by other organizations. The next one is also a very important one, which is about the AI efforts to see whether they are aligned with our business roadmap. Because if these two words are disconnected, unfortunately, AI will be just another initiative that will not provide any, let's say, benefit to the organization. It has to go hand in hand with the business roadmap or the business strategy, basically. The next one is about cybersecurity. And my colleague Tom actually is going to take us into a little bit more of detail in the second part of this presentation. Another important aspect that we should consider to evaluate whether we require AI governance is the processes themselves, to see whether the workflows to exploit AI resources or AI assets are there, and not only in terms of, let's say, the availability, but also in terms of the documentation, identifying whether the input and output that is expected is really the ones that were defined originally, and things like that. Next one, very important one is about the metrics, because at some point we have to evaluate how we've been progressing, or how our AI ecosystem has been evolving, let's say, over time. Next one is about the tools and technology. Are we able to manage our AI artifacts with the current tools we have? Do we need to consider other tools, or do we need to, let's say, integrate new systems with other systems so that we could better exploit our AI assets? So that's the question, basically. And the last but not least is about the quality. Somebody has to take care of the data assets, so the tools, the data, and all those related things, so that they are, let's say, in a very good shape, so that they could be consumed in a good way. So what's the summary of this slide basically is that if we cannot answer these questions properly, probably we are in need to consider, or let's say at least be interested in taking the next step into integrating AI governance into our organization. So I hope that this slide gave you a basic overview of what are the things that AI governance basically covers. But let's try to formalize a little bit more in the next slide by defining why we understand by AI governance. I believe that you have seen that in the internet there are plenty of definitions of AI governance. For the sake of this discussion or this presentation, let's consider AI governance as the exercise of authority, control, and shared decision-making over the management of AI-related assets. So an important aspect is, if we are going to introduce or consider basically AI governance, taking into account, let's say, that we were not able to answer the questions that were presented in the previous slide. So typically in our organizations, they are going to ask us where we should put, let's say, this AI governance department, unit, and team. On the right-hand side of your screen, you can see this house-like structure where we have different layers or different, let's say, building blocks, starting at the bottom with the data foundation, data management, data governance, and AI governance that will basically support our data strategy. And why are we placing AI governance next to data governance? Basically because both fields share a lot of parallelism. They are taking care of policies and guidelines, roles and responsibilities, processes, tools and technology, etc. So that's why this AI governance initiative or initiatives are typically placed next to the data governance initiative that is most probably already in your organizations. So that's basically a way to explain how we, let's say, typically place so that this initiative, so that we could, let's say, continue supporting the digital initiatives of the data strategy within an organization. So how is it the approach that ICC has been taking into, let's say, this kind of initiatives? The initiative we have, the approach we have is basically summarized in 6 steps, 1 to 6, as you can see on the screen. We typically start on a very small scale, but typically performing an assessment to see what is the maturity level of your organization regarding, let's say, the management of your AI assets, of your tools, of your data, algorithms, etc. And the main message here at this first step is that we don't want you to boil basically the ocean. So otherwise we will lose track of, let's say, of many other things, and we can, let's say, miss the boat basically. So we typically recommend to start small, focusing on a small project, a small use case, and afterwards defining, of course, objectives, SMART objectives. SMART standing for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound objectives. So once we identify those objectives, we jump into starting to define or identifying roles and responsibilities. I'm going to be talking in the next slide a little bit more in detail about this aspect, because this is actually one of the most important within this approach that we have. The next one is the consideration about the tools and the technology. You know that typically the tools are not always an answer to a problematic or to a problem, but in most of the cases, the tools and the technology can help us to optimize, to better integrate our systems, but we have to be very careful to see which is the tool that is adequate for our needs. Out there are plenty of tools, plenty of solutions that can help us to optimize and improve the performance, provide better interfaces, better visualization, better reports for the AI management of our ecosystem, but it's not always the solution. Afterwards, on step number 5, we have to, of course, introduce ways to monitor and to report, let's say, how we have been progressing in terms of the, let's say, the management of our systems. Are we evolving? Are we really managing the expectations that we defined at the very beginning and our objectives? And then, of course, after these steps, we jump into the step of the actual change management. Actually, this step is kind of implicit in some of the other steps that were previously mentioned, because normally we will be dealing with people for introducing, let's say, AI governance into an organization. And as you can see at the title, in the title of this slide, actually our approach is to always try to go in a non-invasive way. What does it mean? That is that to minimize as much as possible, let's say, the impact on the users, on the systems, so that, let's say, the different, let's say, approaches, the different roles and responsibilities and tools could smoothly go into an organization. Of course, this is sometimes easier said than done, because we have to be very careful that, let's say, the people are comfortable with the new changes, because AI governance is not about the tools, it's basically all about change management. So, as I mentioned a couple of seconds ago, I will deep dive a little bit more into the roles and responsibilities, because this is actually one of the most key aspects. In this slide, you can see typical AI governance roles and responsibilities. There you can see 6 of them. And actually, this also depends on the size and the complexity of an organization. In some organizations, of course, if they are very small or relatively small, some of the roles will be taken up by the same people, by the same team, or by the same group, because they have not actually sufficient resources to tackle them. That's fine. But typically, you will see to some extent, most or some of those responsibilities that are, let's say, outlined at the bottom of this slide, that are represented, so that they could cover, let's say, the different aspects that should be taken into account if we want to do proper AI governance. Starting on the left, you can see what is typically called a council for AI governance. And maybe the people who are, let's say, a bit more familiar with data governance will already recognize that, again, here, there is like this parallelism that I mentioned a few slides ago, that a data governance and AI governance share a lot, let's say, in terms of the frameworks, in terms of the ways of how we could approach, let's say, the different institutions or organizations. So this Council for AI Governance basically is kind of the highest board or a body, let's say, in an organization that is defining the vision and the strategy. So typically senior leaders that are taking care of saying in which direction the organization should go regarding AI related activities, where they have to invest, what type of opportunities could appear, and also looking at, let's say, competitors, for instance, or how are the new trends, etc., etc. Next to it, we have the AI asset custodian. Typically, this is a role that is sitting on within the IT departments. And actually, this is also another very important role, because our IT colleagues are the ones who are taking care of, let's say, our platforms, the tools. So basically, all the infrastructure that is supporting the different AI assets, not only the data, of course, as I mentioned, there could be other, like the tools, the algorithms, the models, etc., etc. The next one is the AI asset owner, which is actually kind of one of the trickiest one, because typically this identifying who is the owner of an AI asset, of this data set, of this tool, etc., is relatively tricky to identify, because once we identify this person, it means that this person, of course, is accountable for that specific asset. And this is the person who will be taking decisions on who has access to that AI asset, what type of access they have, etc., etc. So it's a big responsibility actually to become an AI asset owner. Next one is an AI asset steward, whose main responsibility is basically monitor the data quality and within an organization. Of course, there could be not only one. There most probably, depending on the size of the organization, would be several of them that are taking care of different subdomains, let's say, of AI assets. Most probably, the current organizations, or let's say in the current state of your organization, those stewards are already present and they are taking care of those AI assets to some extent. Probably not in an official role, but typically if they are already doing any testing, quality control, they are already your stewards basically. The next one are the AI asset producers. Basically, as the name suggests, they are the ones who are creating those AI assets, or basically introducing or bringing from other institutions, from other databases, from other organizations into our organization. So they are, let's say, kind of the interface with others as well, but also they provide, let's say, ways to help, let's say, to connect to other AI assets that are already into our organization. And last but not least, actually the most important ones are, of course, the AI asset users, who are the consumers of the AI asset resources, basically. What is expected actually from them, of course, is not only that they will make use, exploit the different assets, but also provide feedback and reporting, and also help us in the monitoring and the evaluation of our systems. So I hope this slide provides you an overview, let's say, of the different systems. Again, this doesn't mean that the organization needs this kind of, let's say, layout from day one. I mean, we typically organizations start with very small, let's say, set of roles and responsibilities, and then grow organically until, let's say, they reach a status where they can, let's say, mainly cover or manage well the different AI assets. But AI governance actually is not a topic that is isolated, as we have seen in this house-like diagram that has been shown a couple of minutes ago. AI governance is also linked to many other, let's say, aspects. I would like to highlight two of them, and two aspects that are part of this, let's call it AI ecosystem. On the one hand side is the AI principles, that are basically guidelines that are ensuring that our systems are transparent, fair, etc., etc. And on the other hand is the AI risk management, the risk assessment, sorry. And again, my colleague Tom is going to give us a little bit more of detail about this particular aspect in the next minutes. But the important topic, or the important message here, is to say that AI governance is not an isolated initiative. It has to also be coordinated and also receive input and provide input to other, let's say, initiatives around. As you can see at the bottom of each one of those boxes, there are a few examples of how other organizations like OECD, for instance, UNESCO, etc., or let's say governmental or national, regional organizations, having already defining guidelines, principles, and let's say recommendations on how to deal with them. There are plenty of them nowadays. And of course, this is pretty good because it means that the community is, let's say, not only growing, but also helping to bring a bit more of interest, so that, let's say, these kind of technologies could be really successful for each one of the organizations. So let's jump into a little bit of detail about the AI principles, because actually our organization, ICC, UNICC, has also defined AI principles based not only on the literature, of course, on all the recommendations that I just mentioned, but there, as I said, there are plenty of them, but also on our internal experience. There you can see 10 principles, 10 AI principles. I'm not going to go into the detail of all of them. We could probably discuss hours about each one of them. Just to read loudly each of them. The first one is about fairness, reliability and safety, then privacy, security, inclusiveness, transparency, explainability, accountability, sustainability, human agency, and oversight. So most probably you have encountered many of them, or perhaps some of them combined as, let's say, one single principle. At the very end, what we want to have is basically guidelines or recommendations that will somehow help us to manage our systems. Of course, once we are, starting to deal with specific data sets, specific problems, or specific situations and use cases, we will have to most probably emphasize, or let's say, give much more, let's say, weight to some of those principles, so that we could have, let's say, a better, a management of our data. Like, for instance, if we take transparency or explainability, if we are, let's say, depending on the sector where we are tackling, that could be perhaps of highest value, of highest interest. On the right-hand side of those principles, you can see a few numbers. The first 3 columns: severity, harm index, and then a final score, which is the risk score. So basically, this is also, again, something that we captured from the literature, from the experience, and basically from what other organizations have been doing. We introduced these 2 variables of factors. The first one, severity, and the next one, harm index. Basically, ways to, let's say, quantify how, let's say, serious the harm could be, ranging from 1 to 3, and how, let's say, how likely it is that the harm will happen in regarding that specific principle, basically. And then we compute in a very simple way, just multiplying, let's say, those indexes, the risk score. On the right-hand side, you can see some examples of how we could, let's say, much more concretely, for instance, consider those indicators. Again, in the case of transparency, for instance, we can take the number of explanatory guides that are implemented by systems, for instance. Okay, so as I mentioned in previous slides and 2 slides ago, many organizations have been, from the not only the public sector, of course, academia and the private sector started to define their own principles and their own ways of how they have to be doing AI governance. So the UN, of course, has taken major steps into this. And last year, in October 2023, the UN Secretary General called and gathered a high-level advisory body. So basically, 39 experts from all around the world were called to support on to help, let's say, building this governing or these global governing AI guidelines, basically. Why this was needed? Because, there is a global governance deficit with respect to AI. And what was their mandate was to analyze and to advance recommendations for, again, the international governance of AI. And actually, a very fresh-baked, let's say, document was published last month, September last month. I really recommend to go into this document. You can find the link at the bottom of this slide. And within this document, you will see that there are 7 recommendations. I'm only going to highlight recommendation number 6, which is about the global AI data framework, which I believe is actually one of the most important ones there, which is actually helping us or providing guidance on how we have to tackle or how we have to, let's say, be dealing with an AI data framework. So all about the policies, all about the principles, how we can be dealing with, for instance, the standards and the transparency, accountability, for instance, across jurisdictions. And depending, of course, on the field that you are coming from, there are, let's say, different recommendations or, let's say, different examples of how this type of documentation could help you. Just reaching the end, and I wanted to also take the opportunity to use a slide that most of the time, if we are starting, let's say, into this or starting to embark on this kind of initiative around AI governance, our senior leaders come and they ask, what's the added value of doing this? Why should I invest in this? And there you can see 6, let's say, different categories that could, let's say, be improved in our organizations, ranging from the security, sustainability, metrics, standards, asset policies, and literacy. There you can see what could be the potential business outcomes, as apart from, let's say, being able to reply to the questions that you originally have seen in one of the first slides that I presented, but also, let's say, to really have a bit more of concrete ways of identifying the business outcome for each one of those categories. In the case of standards, for instance, if we are going to not only improve, let's say, the way of how we are dealing with our AI assets, but also there will be a better way to follow internal and external standards and increasing the quality, let's say, of our data and our results. Because at the very end, what we want to do is to improve our systems, get better support from AI and AI tools and the AI assets. Of course, IT is, let's say, an important partner. And if we are embarking, let's say, in any of those, let's say, priorities there, we will have to partner with them so that, let's say, they could help us to, for instance, leverage, I don't know, some systems to deal with our master data, or, let's say, to increase our data quality, etc., etc. Okay, just reaching the end then, 3 takeaways that I would like to have for you as takeaways or take-home messages. The first one is AI governance is a practice. It's not a project. It's not something that, let's say, starts today and finishes in 1 month or 6 months. No, it's once it starts, it should be there kind of for life, let's say. And the recommendation, of course, is try to consider non-invasive approaches, because at the very end, we are dealing with people. Yeah. The next one is about business case. It's not only about identifying or capturing a business case, but the tricky part is to identify the appropriate business case so that we could get added value and ideally early harvested benefits. So that's not an easy exercise sometimes, but yeah, it's very, very important. And the last one is don't boil the ocean. Start small and then start and let's say continue growing organically across the organization and start showing some results about, let's say, the exercise that you have been doing. And with that, I will stop here and share and leave the floor for my colleague Tom.
Yes. Hello. I thank you, Eric, for that nice talk about AI governance. I will see if I can share my screen with you all. And I hope that works. Okay. Good. I also have the chat window open, so if you like to interrupt, feel free to do so. I would like to focus now talk a little bit about AI security and safety, why safety is there, and all of these good things. Next slide. Yeah. So with the classic app, the risks we mainly worry about is that only our people can access the application and that the information stays within the application and that the application doesn't start to execute things that it shouldn't. With a generative AI app, those risks are still there. Of course, we're still worried about who can access it and that data leaks don't happen. But the generative part of the Gen AI app adds some additional risks, like, for instance, making sure that hallucinations don't happen at wrong times and making sure that, for instance, no offensive results are generated by, for example. So with that established, I would like to talk a little bit how generative AIs applications are commonly architectured. We all know about the foundational models, the ChatGPTs, the Claudes, and the Google Geminis. And these foundational models, they are very generic and they don't have any information about a specific topic or specific company information, for instance. So there are two avenues to get that company specific information in such a generative AI model. And that is one is by fine-tuning the model, but often these models are not open source and you can't really fine-tune them. So the other approach is the RAG approach, the retrieval augmented generative approach. So that means that basically the AI engineer here on the left has been given the specific client data. And with that data in hand, they basically generate a vector database. That vector database is then queried when the user submits a prompt to the application. So the result of that query, together with the original prompt, is then sent to the large language model, and with all of that specific and company-specific information and the prompt, it generates hopefully a great answer. So that's how the data flows, basically. And with that in mind, you have a generic design of such an application, where you have here the external database, the database with external information. You have the authentication part, the other external data sources, the user input. Basically, what you do as a security practitioner is you try to identify potential attack vectors by identifying the trust boundaries and the security boundaries. So that is the approach I have also taken in practice. And that's basically what you also do with regular applications. You see where people can add information and where it can go wrong, basically. But with an LLM, you have to ask a few other questions as well, because the LLM might be unpredictable. And so you have to design a little bit about around model failure. You have to also keep in mind that the output of the LLM can be controlled by the adversary. So you have to keep track where potentially bad information goes. And also, of course, you have to treat that external data as input for the application. On a classical app, that rarely happens. So that's the approach I've been taken for securing the current generative apps that we have currently seen. But I was wondering, how could such an approach work in the future? How could that methodology work when we see what's coming? So then you have to ask yourself what you think is coming. Now, I don't know, but I think Google is a good example to say to give us an idea what they expect is coming. And in a recent paper, they said, like, look, we have superhuman performance for narrow AI, meaning the AI that is very specific to one use case, like AlphaFold, which can predict protein folding and all that good stuff, and also the Stockfish that is doing it's basically a chess master and these kind of things. So that's very narrow AI, and AI is very good at that already. But the generic AI, they say, is basically just emerging. It's just starting at the moment. Now, that's one source. But another source is OpenAI. So what they have set as their goals is the targets that they want to hit is divided in 5 levels. So the first level they have reached already, they claim, and I think they're right in that. We have great chatbots that can talk in many different languages, in many different styles, and that's amazing. With the model that is recently released by OpenAI is OpenAI's O1 is currently in preview, but it so you can test it already. But they claim that it's a great reasoner. Now, I don't really know about that. I have not enough knowledge to evaluate that, but well, I can give my honest opinion. I think they're not there yet, but it's a great step in that direction. What is interesting though is that they're aiming for the level 5, where an organization is basically made up only by computers. So a whole company is run by only the AI. There is no human involved in this company that is working and generating output and adding value. So that's an interesting thought. That's a really, changes your perspective. I don't want to know how to secure that one yet. I have no idea. But what the thought experiment I gave myself was like, what if there could be an ERP software like an SAP, for instance, that is an LLM. So imagine that an enterprise resource planning software is completely replaced with a large language model. Of course, that large language. It's currently not the case. The capability is not there yet. But how would you secure such a application, such a model? What would it need to be? What are the requirements for that thing? Now, agreed, it's far-fetched at the moment, but here's an example of something that goes in that direction. And with that example is a great thing to explain the current challenges. And now I hope that I shared with the right. It's a little video that I want to show with you. So I hope that I sharing my video too. Otherwise, do we have a problem?
I just got off the phone with my health insurance and
Can
I said,
you
hey
hear?
guys, why did you deny my claim? And they said,
Okay,
hey girl,
great.
sorry, we're actually using AI now. So the AI said that this claim is not good. And I was like, oh, hey, can you tell me why? Because I went to a doctor I've been to in the past, at a location I've been to in the past, with an insurance I've had in the past. Should be all good, right? Should be very chill. And they said, no, we can't tell you why it got denied. As someone that works professionally with AI all day, I love a good AI. This is not a good AI though. Do you guys want to guess what I went to the doctor for? Because I know you're probably thinking, oh, it's something controversial, it's something complicated. The AI couldn't quite figure out if it was okay or not. It was my annual physical. They said sometimes you can just wait for the AI to change its mind though. Okay, when will it do that? Because as a technical person, I'm like, what does that actually mean? In theory, if you're using AI, it means you're running your code or you're running your model on the data that is my medical claim. Why would it change its mind? Are you just gonna run it again one day randomly? Is it best 2 out of 3? And they're like, well, ma'am, sometimes it just changes its mind. Okay, well, what if it doesn't change its mind?
Yeah, that's, I think, a great example of how at the current time, LLMs or AI, generative AI applications should not be used yet because the results they generate can't be trusted at the moment. So the trustworthiness of the outcome is not very high. They also can't explain themselves, like, and why did it go wrong? Why was my claim with why did the AI, the LLM, not approve my claim? It's something that I do every year. So with that in mind, I think these two properties are very necessary for a secure and safe AI. So I've dug a little bit deeper and I tried to define these properties. And I think for trustworthiness, what's important is with trustworthiness, I understand the quality of the generated results. So the results have to be accurate, consistent, and they have to be logical. And the LLM has to be able to explain itself and be open and honest about, like, yeah, I can't make a decision. I don't have enough information, for instance. So that's one part I think that we need to start having metrics for. And another part I've called virtuousness, which is, I think, how the LLM adheres to company policy, the law set by the government, and just our moral and ethical standards. So with that, I am starting an AI security. That's the basis for my AI security and safety framework. Of course, we have the security defined by confidentiality, integrity, and availability. That didn't change, but I think specifically for large language models, we have to also start managing and monitoring as security practitioners the accuracy, consistency, the trustworthiness, and virtuousness of the applications, the AI application. Now, this is just how far I can see, but I think, like, if there's a real company operating in the world that is just active and doing things, there are many more properties that we need to define that are currently unknown yet that should be included in that security and safety framework. So with that in mind, I'd like to leave you with some key takeaways that at the moment, generative AI applications are inherently more risky than classical applications. And that risk is because for a large part, the unpredictability and the level of insecurity that's involved still. So for that, we have to see what are the implications, the real world safety implications have to be considered for applying an LLM when it's regarding decision making. I mean, an LLM for just generating a nice picture that is that's very vague is not important, but when it can influence, for instance, elections, then it is very important. So anyway, and looking forward even further in the future, I think that that safety part, not the hard security part, but the safety, the trustworthiness, the virtuousness, it will have to be included more. And I do think that it will be a part of the AI security practice, let's say. With that, I like to end that was the end of my talk. But I have one more question for all of the participants. And I hope just to trigger, I see already some questions. So I'll just read the chat and see if we can answer the questions that currently in the chat. So shall I read it, or I think that's okay, right?
Yes, feel free to go ahead.
Okay. So I hope I hope I pronounced the name right, but Shazad Dastor has a question, and he says, "Thanks for this really interesting presentation." Thank you. Have to leave, but wanted to leave this here for UNICC. Okay, we'll respond either in an email to you. The Secretariat has not been able to make such progress in integrating AI into our work. There are several reasons for this, including lack of resources, licensing issues, etc. However, there is definitely a need for AI auditing as a service, both for UN entities and for member states entities. This could really be an effective business line for UNICC. Our latest partnership with Humane Intelligence can help as well. Happy to discuss it further. Thank you. Well, I think there are a few BRMs in this call. So thank you for that suggestion. It is a field that is mushrooming, and there's a lot of work to do and not enough hands to do it. So I think UNICC is always open to assist. I'm not the right person to help you with that, though, but if you want, we can definitely have a BRM reach out to you. Is there any other question? Elena has indeed a question. Amazing presentation. Thank you. Thank you. Will the recording be available online? Yes, it will. Another question came in from Antonio Iglesias. One of the low-hanging fruits is adding a data loss prevention tool to prevent corporate PI or PII to escape the company. Absolutely. I have not seen such an architecture yet, and that's why I think it was important for me to incorporate that slide that I showed you a little bit about the current architecture, the RAG architecture. At the moment, I don't know an architecture that has a PII prevent DLP solutions included. I hope that answers the question. Thank you for the presentation, says Nassim Motalebi. I hope I pronounced the name right. Thank you for the presentation. You provide a clear framework on AI governance. How do you envision implementing the framework across AI value chain as well as its life cycle? How can we add that complexity to our governance measures in the UN? This includes security, privacy, and safety. I think that's one for you, Eric.
Yes. Yeah, thanks for the question. Yes, indeed, this is how do we envision, or how would we recommend, let's say, one of the first steps would be, as I mentioned in one of the slides, to perform an assessment to see what's the current status of the maturity, because many of those things have been, let's say, mushrooming, as Tom very appropriately said, in different, let's say, corners of the entire UN, because of the curiosity, because, let's say, of the people, and also the different initiatives. I think one of the important points, again, would be to perform this assessment and see to what extent we can go, and again, define what would be the next steps in terms of what we could be really reach to gain value. One of the tricky parts there is, of course, to cover an entire organization. And for that, of course, we will need a plan, basically a roadmap, defining what will be the initial objectives, and after, I don't know, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, depending, of course, on different factors like budget on the first hand side, but also, let's say, the business objectives. As I mentioned again in one of the slides, it's important that AI governance is really married with, let's say, the data strategy of your organization. If there is no, let's say, buy-in from higher managers of your organization, this basically will fail and will die very soon. So that's something to take into account. So that will be basically the recommendation to start with that. And maybe just to stress one again, not trying to boil the ocean. Start small, take some, let's say, specific use cases and work with them, let's say, until you reach some convincing results that could, let's say, not only help you to bring extra budget, but also show and demonstrate what are the results that you can achieve with all those, let's say, small efforts that we have done at the beginning. Over to you, Tom. Yeah.
Okay. I believe the next question was by Kenneth. Kenneth says, any comments you can share on the transparency and explainability of AI principle? I have no experience with it, but what I've heard from some interesting talks by OpenAI people is that they are working on AI proving, sort of either mathematically or in another way, proving that the outcome and the calculation and the process is correct. I think it is very important, if we want to have good reasoners, that this indeed is the case. I wish that we at UNICC would be at the forefront and that we could have a great answer to this. But currently, I have to trust what the big companies are saying, and I think it's absolutely necessary to have an explainable AI. It is not. I haven't seen it in the world out there. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Indeed, I think there is a lot of work still to be done there. There are most probably, let's say, academic initiatives that are going into this direction to develop some tools to support, let's say, to check on the validity of some things. I've seen a few specific examples, like, for instance, to evaluate, to, let's say, cross-check whether some some text, some pieces of text were generated by AI or were generated by a human. Most probably you have seen that there are some, let's say, available tools where you can copy, where you can paste your piece of text, and this tool will tell you, yeah, this indeed has been generated by an AI tool. I think there are some initiatives going into this direction, but still quite a lot of work to do. Yeah.
Okay. With that in mind, let's go to the next question. Again, excuse me for not pronouncing your name correctly, but it's Jabari, if I'm correct, Jabari Garnes. Sensitization and awareness is key to the further development of AI governance, especially in the more developing countries who are interested in AI and its accelerating properties. But do not know where to start, I guess. How could UNICC assist partners such as UNDP in integrating AI for governance and development for its beneficiaries? Okay. How could UNICC assist partners such as UNDP in integrating AI for governance? I have no clue. Do you have a clue, Eric? We are happy to assist with doing POCs and helping with developing it and delivering the hands on the keyboards.
I think one of the major steps was this topic I mentioned about this AI governance humane document that has been just produced or published last month, and basically within this document is highly stressed, let's say, the coverage, the global coverage, in a sense, so that, let's say, is not only an opportunity for, to say so, rich economies, or let's say economies that, or countries or organizations that could really afford this kind of technologies. But one of the ultimate aims of such a recommendation is to really be inclusive, in the sense that other countries, like developing countries, or let's say organizations that have less resources, could also benefit from it. And one specific initiative that they have as part of their recommendations is to create a global fund. So basically a big pot that will also share, help to share, not only distributing and adding and promoting, let's say, more computing power, but also coming up with trainings, with other types of resources to increase the literacy about this topic and stuff like that. So again, I would really recommend to go through that document, because there are interesting highlights, of course, at a very high level, because that at this point is we cannot go into. They couldn't go perhaps into some specifics of certain organizations or certain situations or realities, but at least it's already providing an interesting framework that I'm sure UN will continue pushing for.
Yeah, and after rereading the question once or twice, I think indeed you touched on a good point. I think training and awareness indeed is key in this to help the developing countries, and of course we don't have currently such a training on the shelf. But again, we are happy to develop it together with UNDP, and maybe even a training, or like with the security section also, we do tabletop exercises, and maybe with key people or key organizations within the developing countries, doing a tabletop exercise could maybe be a good idea. I'm just brainstorming here. We don't have anything on the shelf at the moment, as far as I know. Yeah, so then Michelle Ko, I hope I pronounced the last name right. Tom and Eric, thank you for your presentation. Thank you for that compliment. From your experience, is there any case of data leakage on the use of AI? What will be the best solution if it occurs? There are many cases where data leakage happened. One that immediately jumps in my mind is a telephone company that is from, let's say, South Korea that generates mobile devices. Their development, the programmers were using OpenAI to assist in programming in the early days of OpenAI. And they just copied and pasted. When Copilot in Visual Studio was not even there, they copied and pasted copious amounts of source code for the phone, for their new phone, and asked the AI to evaluate or to improve, or I don't know what they did, but they pasted it in pasted it in OpenAI, and OpenAI didn't have the right measures in place, and as a result, that the whole or part of that source code leaked out. Because I'm a nerd, I think that's an interesting case of data leakage, but it's not really UN specific. What will be the best solution if it occurs? It's very difficult. If it's occurred, the date. I have a bit difficulty understanding the question, because if the data leakage occurs, the data is out there, and when it's on the internet, it's very difficult to get it back, and to delete it. So, yeah, I don't know.
Most probably the best solution will be to, let's say, take some actions, of course, to avoid that this happens again.
Exactly.
Once you discover that has already happened. But of course, prevention is a topic, because this requires investment. This requires, I don't know, a full workflow that will be making sure that all those things are taken care, because we will have to register when it happened, how it happened, what is the impact. I mean, there are plenty of variables, and that requires quite some effort, of course. And not all organizations can pay for that, basically, right?
It is the say, or it's very similar to the question of Antonio Iglesias, where he said, like, a DLP, a data loss prevention tool, to prevent corporate PII or PI escaping from the company. There's no standard framework for that in place. It would be great if it's there, and UNICC would be very happy to assist you to develop a situation, or sorry, an application where we can incorporate a DLP solution with an AI, a large language model. Yeah, I am not aware of cookie cutter solutions on the market at the moment. Okay, you're very welcome. Happy to answer your question, and thank you for the question. Then there's Thomas. Oh, why does no? For me, it's a difficult last name. I apologize. And Kugulu. We need 11 labs to pronounce your name in a correct way. I don't know. I hope I don't bastardize it too much. How soon do you expect to actively use AI in the UN operations? And what are some of the challenges do you foresee in integrating this across your operations worldwide? How soon? My knowledge of UN operations is limited, first of all. And then predicting how soon something happens with this very dynamic environment, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna go there, because I just basically don't know. OpenAI, or the companies and organizations that are at the forefront of AI and LLM development, they surely have a lot on the shelf. They don't show everything they have. So predicting what will happen, I don't know. I think it's very risky. But I do hope that they are successful in achieving their goals that they have set out. And once their applications and their solutions have proven to be functioning as desired, I think why not incorporate them not only at the UN operations, but in many organizations across the globe. That's one part.
If I can, go ahead, Tom. Go ahead.
No. Yeah, that's one part. What are some of the challenges do you foresee in integrating them? Well, the ones that I foresee at the moment is the trustworthiness. How good is, how well can you trust the LLM to generate results that are correct, at least at the same level of correctness as a human would generate. And then the virtuousness, I think, are also I see currently as a challenge. So how well does it abide to the law and the morals and the ethical standards? That's what I foresee. I think the technology is all there, and I mean, integrating one with the other, the technical challenges are less than the challenges of getting the AI to function correctly. But Eric, maybe you can add something.
Yes, well, I think I mean the question is very good, a very good question, because as my take on it is that I mean, as you, Tom, I don't have, of course, an overall view of the entire UN operations. But on the one hand, we know that many organizations, many agencies have been already, let's say, embarking on this by not only, let's say, starting to get licenses, trying out, but also starting to test some software solutions, as well as defining their own, let's say, local rules of how to do things, which is good. I mean, and again, I will once again insist that maybe go back to this document that I mentioned in my presentation, where there is one of the recommendations is actually to create a kind of office, and if I'm not mistaken, it's an AI office that is basically sitting kind of next to UN Secretariat, so that there could be a global coordination of those little efforts, let's say, that are happening across the entire UN family. I believe, of course, that this is going to be quite a challenge, because trying to cover, of course, different needs, different requirements, different objectives, but will most probably provide, let's say, some general guidelines. And regarding when this could happen, I would say it's already happening, but let's say in a very, very early stage. I think we have already entered into this era, let's say, but let's say in some cases, of course, some organizations are accelerating a little bit more because most probably they have some more resources, etc. And as part of the challenges, I definitely agree what Tom mentioned, but I will also add most probably the literacy one, because then this is an important one to, let's say, make sure that, AI literacy, so that, let's say, the different organizations could really embrace in a good way and exploit in a good way the different tools.
Yeah, and after thinking about it, I could maybe give an example of not UN operations, but our current CSOC, so our cybersecurity center, where we gather all kinds of let's say, of security-related information. It's an avalanche of data, and an avalanche of things that happen real time. So we have people monitoring real time events, security related events. And in that application that we use, there is already AI assisting with pattern recognition and seeing like, okay, we have this event, that event, and this indicator of compromise happening. That is now a serious event that needs attention. So that is actually in the security operations, and it's actually an AI that is built in the software that we use. It's not a bespoke solution. It's a generic solution that is used by multiple organizations or by all kinds of CSOCs around the world. I do think UN operations has a I don't know enough about UN operations to say if there's a similar application that can do something and if that application can be extended by AI. I'm sorry, but I'm sure it will come. Yeah, hope that answers your question, Thomas.
Okay, sorry to interrupt, but we are going beyond the time. So I think that, as mentioned at the beginning, we can collect anyway all questions and put the answers in written. So I would like to thank both Tom and Eric for this insightful session and all of you for attending. Again, we will be sending an email to all of you with the link to the recording of this session and the Q&A. Thank you again, and I wish you a nice rest of the day. Bye. See you in next event.